What today we're going to focus on today is on JSON, which is a magical, wonderful tool for you. And one of the coolest things possible is the fact that Alpha has really embraced this technology and included it and built it into it on multiple levels. And my intent is to kind of give you a feel for the background about what is JSON, why it's important, how Alpha approaches it, so you can really have a basis to start your education and your development process. What I do want to do is, before I go through that, I'd like to go ahead and go over, again, real quick. Last week we covered the Alpha, and let me get this here, the Alpha Dev Conference, where we talked about disconnected, really a lot of content about the new disconnected capability. The next generation UX design capabilities, where you're going to make it much easier for you to work with CSS, HTML, and third-party designers to make your apps look just fabulous. The movement towards OpenStack, basically where the tool will be able to leverage more and more third-party capabilities, such as JavaScript on the back end, and a lot of really neat things in the pipe coming along to be able to support the ability for you to really leverage the tool with the existing ecosystem out there. There was also a lot of discussions on the web API consumption, and we're going to actually touch upon that a bit today in terms of the ability to connect into a whole range and universe of web APIs that will allow you to enhance your applications with third-party solutions in a very simple, easy, point-and-click kind of methodology. There were a number of great customer demonstrations, really eye-opening, and also some great networking. So again, we missed you at the event. If you make sure to go up onto the Alpha website, a lot of the sessions have been recorded, and we highly encourage you to go through and watch those. I think you'll get a lot of value out of them, and also block out your plans for next year to attend the Alpha Dev Conference 2015. With that, I'm going to jump into now JSON. Okay, so what I'd like to do first is to kind of talk a little bit about JSON and what JSON is, and then I'm going to dive into actually what the tool itself or what Alpha does to embrace and use JSON. So first, so we'll go through that. We'll talk a little bit about the Alpha training series, HTML templating, which uses JSON, list data sources, and then list disconnected operations. So that's a quick overview of our kind of schedule for today. And let me go ahead and start with, all right, JSON. JSON is an industry standard. In fact, if you go to json.org, it's a very dry, boring website, but you'll see that JSON has been standardized, and there's actually a standard notation. And what it really means is JavaScript object notation. It came out of the JavaScript library, and the JavaScript language is basically, they wanted to come up with a way to encapsulate object-oriented data, and they came up with JSON. And JSON has taken off because it's a very, very effective way to manage data and to use data. And to give you an example here, is what I like to do is, first is when you're learning about JSON, what you want to do is check out Selwyn's training, and you can check out the website json.org. There's a lot of other websites out there, but if you go to the Alpha Anywhere blog, to the Alpha Software blog, and search for JSON training with Selwyn. Selwyn has a whole series, and actually, Dave, if you get a chance, if you could put that into a message to everybody, the link, that would be really appreciated. I didn't get a chance to copy that down. But actually, Selwyn walks you through a great series of trainings that is going to actually go in far more depth than I do today, talking about JSON. And I think you'll really enjoy it. It'll really give you a feel for what it is. But kind of take it up a level. In the past, we had XML. So what you're seeing on the screen right now, on the top part is XML, and on the bottom part is the equivalent to that in JSON. Now, XML was kind of the first attempt at creating a universal sort of descriptor language or process to move data around. And XML was the original way that web services talk to each other. But the problem with XML, although very flexible, very powerful, was it was hard to read, and it was confusing, and it just was tough to do things with it. It really it was so specialized and was almost over designed for what you were trying to do, especially in simple situations. So XML is widely used. There's a lot of capabilities in Alpha to consume XML, create XML, and leverage that. And again, a lot of existing web services out there. But more and more over the last few years, people have been moving to JSON. And so if you look at the difference between the top and the bottom, you're going to see that first and foremost, JSON is far easier to read. It is much easier to kind of get an understanding of what's going on. So in this case, we have a set of employees. So we have essentially an array or a list of employees, and that array contains their first name and last name. So as you can see, it's a little tough to read that on the top portion, but by looking at the JSON, it becomes much more easy. Now, JSON is very powerful. You can describe and put into it very complex data structures, so you can nest things with it. So you can create an object structure. And the way behind that is that right now you're seeing employees and then they have a set of there. But you could actually go up a level and say company, and then under that have employees, and then under that have the actual individual employees. So it's nestable. And the cool thing about that is that you can create essentially very complex capabilities. And as we talk about this a little bit later, as we go through some of the presentations of what Alpha does, JSON lends itself very well and very effectively to kind of a newer way to handle how a back-end and a front-end works together. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes here. But the first thing you need to understand is that JSON is very approachable. It's nothing to be scared of. It's actually very easy to read and very understandable versus the historical XML, which you saw on the top there. And you'll see lots of examples out there. There's great websites, and I do encourage you to go through Selwyn's training videos, because he really starts explaining at a much more detailed level what JSON is and how to use it from there. And again, if you go to the JSON Alpha software blog and look for JSON Explained, that's the term you would look for. And it's about, I think it's on the second page of the blog. You'll see a great series of maybe 3 or 4 videos that walk you through, maybe take you about 20-30 minutes to watch, and you'll come away really having a better feel for JSON. So that's a little bit background there. Now, Alpha has a rich capability of supporting JSON. So not only, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes how you can use JSON on the front end with the tool, but in XBasic, you also have a rich capability of sort of creating and consuming JSON. So don't worry about the code here, but this is a quick example of some XBasic code. And the neat thing about XBasic is that they have these 2 functions, one called JSON generate and the other one called JSON parse. And the idea behind that is that JSON is text. And that's the important thing to realize, is that it's always text. It's an object notation, but it's really just a chunk of text that's been formatted in a certain way. And often what you're going to want to do is grab that text, and if we start kind of from the bottom, and then you can grab that and turn it into a pointer variable within XBasic. And I'm not sure who's dealt with that, but a pointer variable is like, in this case, it's p.name, p.dateofbirth, p.time is the different sub-pieces of it. And so what this really, the point of this is that there are built-in functional commands that are been put into the system that allow you to take internal data structures from Alpha and turn it into JSON, and vice versa, take external world JSON and turn that into internal representation, and it makes it easier. So from a coding perspective, JSON becomes very simple to use to generate there. And what's really neat about this too is that as Alpha develops and as it becomes a standard platform out there, what you're going to find is initially you're probably going to be consuming a lot of JSON. You're going to be connecting to web services, to third-party systems. But then what's going to happen is you build your solution. You're going to go, hey, wouldn't it be great if I could expose my system and the data and everything in a secure way to the outside world? So you're going to turn it around, and you're going to have situations where you're going to want to generate JSON and then through a web service provide it to other systems. And the cool thing about that is it allows you to build an ecosystem around your application. And the key thing here is, I just wanted to let you know, is that underneath the covers, there are some great sort of tools and built-in functions that allow you to take, say, database data and turn it into JSON, or take calculations, turn it into JSON, and then serve that up to the outside world. And Alpha is really working hard on making that even easier and easier as it goes along. So Alpha has not only the external, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, but also the internal Alpha commands that are available there. So what I'm going to go through now, and I'll come back to this slide in a minute, is to I want to go into the development environment and kind of touch on some areas where JSON is kind of used and where you're going to start engaging with the JSON stuff. So I'm going to get out of the presentation now, and I'm going to jump over into the development system. So we are into just a very simple kind of there. And so I have a UX form, and for people who are new, this is our form building software. You have your different commands on the left, or your different both code but also different controls. In the middle is your structure of your UX, and on the right is there. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new list control, and this is a critical item. So I'm going to create a new list control, and I'm going to call this list test just for things there. So now that I've created a new list, I'm going to go into that list. Now, as we've talked about before, a list is basically a visual representation of underlying data, and that data can come from different sources. So the one we spend a lot of time on, and which is the more natural one, is the SQL data source. So the ability for you to consume data from a database, and so it has the ability to say, I'm going to connect my list to a database. And so you have SQL, you can do the standard connection string, pick the table, pick the fields, and then do the list and put those pieces out there. Now, that is just one of the different data sources. We can also connect to DBF for traditional DBF kind of applications. You could also have a static list, and I'm going to show that in a moment. But also you have a very powerful one, which is called custom. So what I'd like to step on and kind of start explaining how the JSON works is I'm going to go ahead and go into static. So I've created a list. I'm not going to connect it to a database, but I'm going to select static. So when I click on the static here, you'll notice that then I have some static data that's available. So I can go ahead and double click on that, and I have some sample data that's available, and I can put in some sample data. So I'm just going to put name and addresses. Okay, so this has sort of a traditional, and bear with me, a traditional structure. So on your first line, you have your fields, or your columns, first name or column names, first name, last name, city, and state. And then below that, on each individual line, you have a record with John, Smith, Boston, etc., etc., etc. So if I click OK, and I go ahead and go to my list layout and say I want all those columns in there, and state, OK, and I do my preview of the list, you'll notice that, and it's a little hard to see, I apologize, the screen density, but now you have a list, and so you have your different columns of data, and I can go ahead and select items and hover over them and do all that piece. But this is static data that's been generated and put into the system. And in this situation, for the data source, when we select a data source, it's using a traditional kind of, not comma separated, but call it a delimited list, where you're delimiting it with the pipe character from there. Now let's take this a little bit next step and kind of apply a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and delete these static choices here. And now I'm going to go ahead and click Sample Data. And if you'll notice now, I'm going to go ahead and pick some with JSON. So these right here are standard kind of delimited list kind of data. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click Static Data using JSON array syntax. And so now you'll notice in here something that looks like what I showed you before is now, instead of a delimited list, we now have a JSON list. And let me walk you through this so you kind of get a feel for it. So it's the same exact data that I had as name of addresses, but instead of being formatted like this, which is I'm going to now put in the JSON array version, which is the equivalent of it, But there, now let's walk through that. So with JSON, we have essentially these rows. So each one of these is a row. And then for each row, you're going to notice that we have the column name, first name, the data value, last name, colon, data value, city, colon, data value. So if I wanted to add my own, I could copy it and just type that right in there. So what this is basically a JSON data source. And if I click OK, I go to my list layout. Notice that I already had the same column name, so it's picking that up. And I preview the list, you'll see something very equivalent, but in this case I only have 3 rows because that was the static data that was in there. And the cool thing about this, and the reason I want to show you, is that the list control can take data and present it from JSON data sources. In this situation, the static data, this was static data, so it was just textual information that was put in here. But, and I'll show you in a moment, there's no reason to say why this data isn't static, but actually can come from an outside source. And we'll walk through and talk a little bit about how to do that. Now, again, if I want to change, I could edit this data right here, add more rows, and do other things. But you'll notice that one thing I really like about JSON is that it's very if you'll notice in here, it is very readable. And so it's very easy to sit there and kind of say, if I want to copy and make a new row, I could make it very quickly because the data structure is very understandable. Now, the other thing that's very critical about JSON is that you'll notice that we have a fairly simple example where it's just a first name, last name, city, state. And so you have essentially one level. But let's say you wanted to have multiple levels of data, and let me see if they have any. Yeah, okay. So let's say you wanted to have hierarchical data in here, where you wanted to have, another level, so it's not just there. So let me go ahead and click this sample data. Let me click hierarchical static data using a JSON array syntax. Now you're going to see something a little interesting. It looks pretty similar, but now we have what is called hierarchical data. Now, that's one of the powers of JSON, is that if you had a delimited list, how would you represent hierarchical data? It would become very confusing to use tabs, to use special characters, etc. It's very hard to do so. But with JSON, it's very simple to create hierarchical data. So let me walk you through this JSON and show you this. So you'll notice that we have the similar structure where you have a starting and an ending brackets. Then within it, we've got kind of a chunk of data here, a chunk of data here, and a chunk of data here. And so I'll walk you through this one. So we have what we had before, which is first name, last name, city, and state. So that data is the same. But you'll notice now we also have something called children, and then after that we have a colon and a group of data. So the cool thing about this is the way JSON is saying is that first name, last name, and city are text. They're just data that's associated with it. But now we have this thing called children, and putting in the colon and this sort of the square brackets, it's now saying for this record, within that is a set of sub-records. And in this case, it's the name of the children, their name and age. So in this case, we have 3 children, Callie, Griffin, and Luke. And you have a name and an age, a name and an age, and a name and an age for each one. So now we've created essentially a parent-child relationship for John Smith has the children, Callie, Griffin, and Luke. For Henry Rhodes, we have Howard and Robert. And for Allison Berman, we have Jeff, Roxanne, Claudia, and Denzel. And this could be further, nested. So, for instance, if I wanted each children to list the toys they would have, I could merely extend the same concept, add sort of a toys, and then a sub thing for toys. So JSON can handle hierarchical data. And that's the key differentiation between, say, this static kind of structure that you were using before with this. And so you can actually represent very complex data, essentially kind of mimic a whole database of information. So to take the classic example is you have a company that has orders, line items, and then products. You can mimic the same thing where you have your first level is orders, the second level is product, and then below that are line items, excuse me, and then below that is products. So you can represent that. Now if I click OK, and I go ahead and go to list layout, again we have this preview list here, so you can see that information there. But what's really powerful about that is now I can do things like chain lists together. So I could attach this data to a parent list and a child list and use the cascading list concept with the same data source to do that. So the important thing I wanted to get across in this section is that already you can start playing around with JSON just using the static data that ships with Alpha. And you can go ahead and play with it, and there's also really good examples of JSON out there. If you just search for JSON examples in Google, you can literally copy that and paste it right into it. And what it will do is give you examples of being able to edit and utilize that information. And so so this kind of gives you a quick overview of how we're using JSON and the fact that the list control can consume JSON data. Now, not the most, so the next step now is, okay, I can use a list control with SQL data. I can use a list control with static data, and meaning just a pre-canned set of JSON. And in fact, one thing that's really important about that, and I want to take a note, just kind of a sidestep right now, is as you're starting to deal more and more with mobile data and mobile implementations, you may have situations where you want to have static data in your application, stuff that doesn't change very often. And one of the cool things about Alpha and what it can do is that you could actually literally create a JSON data file which has some static JSON in it, and then within the list control, grab that data off the, in this case, the mobile device. So what's great is that when you're doing PhoneGap or other things like that, you can create and include secondary JSON data files, and then within your application, refer to those static data files for data that you need to display to the user. So it's very flexible and very, very sort of user-friendly in the mobile world. Now I'm going to take it to the next step. So one of the real critical elements of why JSON is so important is the following, is that JSON was really developed to allow you to move data between systems in a really easy, understandable way. So you're representing data using JSON, but one of the most powerful things about it is that you can then transmit that JSON data through a web session from one system to another. So what you want to be able to do is and so it's becoming sort of that standard way or language or structure to pass data around the internet. So if you are going to connect with a third-party system, they're most likely going to have a JSON API that you can do that. And if you want to look for examples out there, you can just go into there, and let's go ahead and let's go to, say, JSON API source examples. If you want to look for some out there, there's a bunch of JSON API examples here, and examples that go there, but also there are, let's see, JSON API sources. I apologize, I should have already had one of them selected on that piece. I'm sorry, did my mic go off for a second there? Dave, how's it coming through? Is it coming through okay?
It's coming through loud and clear, thank you.
Great, great, great. So bottom line is you'll be able to do that. Now, a great example of that, and if I go back into here, and example that will do something far better than I can in this short period of time, is a video that was created by Selwyn and also Bob Moore. Now, we had a recent example where Bob created a mobile application that consumed web APIs to present information for the World Cup. And there's also a really great demonstration of this, or video, that walks you through step by step on how to do that. If you go to YouTube and you search for consuming and processing JSON server-side blah, 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 you'll see it up here. And what I'll do is go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and take this right now, and I'm going to send this to everybody. You should have a YouTube link in your there to go there, and that's going to walk you through step by step in a far more detail than I am here. But what this will show you is that when you're working with a list, you have this capability called custom. And what custom is, which is very, very powerful on it, is that you'll notice that you can specify an XBasic function that will be called to generate the list data. So in the first example, the source of it is SQL data, so it's getting the data from the database, also with DBF files. With static, we created our own static data, in this case in JSON format, and it was sort of built into the list. But what's great is we can create a XBasic function that will allow us to then basically create JSON data and get JSON data and put it into the list. And what's cool about that custom function is that you have the ability to build the function to actually literally call out over the internet to a third-party system, grab some JSON data, and then present it to the systems from right here. And the way to go about that is, and this video here that I sent you will walk you through step by step on how to do it. And really, it's fairly straightforward. Is basically you create a function, and we'll call this fn JSON data. Okay, and then we can actually, what's nice about that, so we're going to create, think of it as like an AJAX callback kind of concept where we're creating there. So I can create a sample XBasic function. So I'm going to do a complete, actually let me do this, I'm sorry, sample example, where it's just a populate list function right here. So I'm going to copy this function to the clipboard. So let me step through that. I apologize if I'm going too fast. I've selected custom. Down here we have the system is saying, okay, great, you want to use custom to populate this list. Well, I need either a JavaScript function or an XBasic function that's going to deliver me back that data. So in my case, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click on XBasic function. I'm going to click the ellipsis button, so it brings up here to say what is the function's going to be. Fn, let's go, so we'll go fn JSON data. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put in the name of the function here, and Alpha has a real simple thing that says sample XBasic function. So instead of starting from a blank page, I can merely put in the name of the function, and then it has an examples. I can have a template only with no sample code, a simple example, which is what I'm going to use today, and then also a more complex example that's available. So I'm going to go ahead and click simple example. So you'll notice that it's created for me my function for me. So I'm going to click the copy to the clipboard, click close, click OK, click OK. Let's see. Oh, and okay, here's one of the tricky parts, and I want to show you this, is that the function, you'll notice up here it says if you define an XBasic, you have to, before, it's a chicken and egg problem. You have to actually define it before defining the list. So what I usually do is I create this, I go through and do this create that, grab it, get the sample XBasic code, copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to cancel out here. I'm going to go to my XBasic functions over here and paste it in there. So now what I have is on my UX control, I have my function JSON data. Now I can go back into my controls, double click on list, go to custom, and just put in that function call name, and now it should run custom data source. That is define. Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Bear with me. That's the problem there. Let me go back to my function. And what it's doing right here is it's making a call into the database, basically the Northwinds database, and grabbing it. So I'm changing, it had a pre-built-in connection string, and I'm changing the connection string because it was having a problem. It was running the function, but what was happening is saying your connection string didn't make sense. And I apologize for the confusion there. So I'm going to go back into my list. I've kind of got my function running. And by the way, you test your function before you get in the list to make sure it's working okay. But I'm going to go to custom, and I'm going to put in xbasic function, that JSON data. Now, doesn't like that. Let me make sure I have this right here. Why is that not going there? What's working in there? Okay, control. Let's test. Custom. Okay. What it was is that it wasn't recognizing it. So I'm going to walk through that a little slower in a few moments just because I kind of went around on it. But so what I've done is, and let me walk through it right there. So the first thing we do is you'll have created and maybe copied the example function in it. So this function right here is going to be the source of the data for the list. And if I go through this function, and I won't go in detail, but I open up a connection to the database, in this case the Northwinds database, I then select information from customers, and then I use that data to create JSON that then will be delivered out of this function call. And this has really good documentation to walk you through how to do that. So I'm going to go back into my controls now. Now that I've created my function, I'm going to go into my list. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I'm doing a custom there. I'm going to do the function JSON data. And now you'll notice that it's showing me this list. So what it's done is when I clicked on list layout, it actually made a call to the database, pulled the data, and then showing me the fields that are available. So let's say I want to put company name and contact name on it. So the cool thing is once you have your data source set up and you're getting JSON data, the rest is point and click. You don't have to worry about JSON syntax or anything along those lines. And in fact, if I do a preview list here, if everything works, you'll notice that I have a list of customers. So instead of going directly to the SQL data, I'm actually going from JSON. Now, obviously you're like, well, maybe why wouldn't you just go to the SQL? This is just for demonstration purposes. If we actually go ahead and go into this function here, instead of connecting to a, in this case, a SQL database to grab the data to turn it into JSON, you could actually have in this function a call to a third-party web service and grab that data. And that's where I highly suggest, after you have a chance here, is to go watch this video. It only takes a few minutes, and what it will do is show you how, in this case, it's actually literally going from going out to the Twitter, grabbing some Twitter data and showing it in the list control. And what Alpha is working on right now is that this is going to become simpler and simpler. Right now, to do that, you have to kind of write this, this custom function, and which is fine. It's not that hard. There's great examples of it. There's great videos. But where Alpha is going, and this is a very important thing, is that you're going to see as we go forward that this custom, there's going to be new selections here. And these selections are going to be pre-made sort of tools or connectors to connect to third-party web services. And what's great about that is it's going to take care of essentially writing that code for you for the function call. So if you do need to do it now, you need to write a little code in there, but once you've written the code, as we showed before, everything else works in the same, meaning in terms of, like, I can do this list layout, and let's say I want this list layout actually to be a free form, and I can use a predefined template. Let's go ahead and grab this one here. And then I can say, the company name is here and the contact name is there. And then I can preview the list. And if it works well, now I've got a new structure. So now I don't have to worry about JSON and how it's structured. I can merely use the tools as point and click to lay out and make the things there. So I can separate that kind of plumbing from the actual visual representation of the data from there. So that is one of the most powerful parts of JSON, is that built into the list control is the ability for it to understand and use JSON. either from static or from a custom function, or coming up soon, and you'll hear about this in the near future, pre-built sort of connectors that will connect to standard systems. That's one of the cool things going on out in the outside world there, is that a lot of the systems are starting to use more and more standard interconnect methodologies to pass the JSON data back and forth. And what's great is that Alpha is able to leverage that to actually make a lot of that writing the function call even simpler and simpler, so you won't even have to do it. You'll just have to have some authorization keys, API keys, and then everything else will work fine. And once you've done that, then you're working within the regular point and click tools to generate those pieces there. So very, very powerful from that standpoint there. So that's kind of just a real quick and dirty of why JSON is really important, especially when it comes to the list control. But I'd like to explain one other thing, and this is really cool. When we use this list control, and we go to the list properties, as we showed before, to persist data to make this a disconnected solution, all we have to do on the list control is say persist data to local storage. And what that allows you to do is actually, from your back end, store the data locally. Now, what's really neat about this and how it relates to JSON is that when you do this, what happens is you're normally going against a SQL data source. So, for instance, Northwind's database. When it's pulled into the system, into the list control actually grabs the data from the database and creates a local JSON string to manage that data. So actually, the list control is using JSON as sort of a local storage of the data that you have. So the cool thing about that is that the list control is very good at understanding JSON. So any changes you make, it basically writes into the JSON the changes that you've made, and it manages it that way. So JSON is really becoming that key piece of item that really supports a lot of the different technologies within the company. And if you go in there and you actually show, when you're doing, you actually show the debug features, you'll actually see the JSON that's actually being generated automatically by the list control and managed by it in the local storage area there. And very, very powerful, very cool stuff there. But another thing that I wanted to illustrate, which is very important about JSON, is the fact that there's a whole new way of how things go. So let me go back into my, actually I want to leave some time for questions, and I see there's some good questions coming up here. So I'm going to go for another 5 minutes, and then I want to open it up to questions and answer all the pieces from there. So one of the key things to understand about how systems work out there is I'm going to go ahead and kind of draw a new, I'm going to create a blank slide here, and I'm going to draw kind of how things work now, but how they're going to be working in the future. So I'm going to create a shape here. So this is the, let's call this the app server, okay? And then we have the shape over here, and this is kind of architectural high level, but it's important, web browser, okay? So how this works is that the web browser makes a call to the app server, to the web server. And so basically it's saying, give me this page. And then bear with me here, what the app server does is it generates HTML and sends that HTML and JavaScript back to the web browser. So, and let me go ahead and put that in right here, HTML/CSS/JavaScript. So again, you make a call from the web browser to the app server, you request that information, the app server essentially builds a web page and in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and sends it back to the web browser. Now, what happened is after a while, there were issues with this because if you were doing whole pages, you had that page refresh, and you were also shoving an enormous amount of data back and forth, so it was pretty laggy. And then what started moving towards is what are called AJAX callbacks. Okay, So now what happens is that you do your initial load there, and to speed up the process, the web browser sends what's called an AJAX callback to the app server. The app server sends back some JavaScript, and in this case, it's only JavaScript. And then the web browser does the work of updating the page. So for instance, like let's say you had an order form. You could say, okay, I want a new order. In the old days, what would happen is that it would send the request to the app server. The app server would build the whole page and send the whole page back to the web browser. A little time consuming, very laggy, not very exciting. Then now, what you can do is you have already delivered the page, so you have sort of the order form on there, and then you can send back an AJAX callback saying, hey, you know what, I just want a new record of data, and the app server, instead of sending the whole page back, merely sends some JavaScript, and then this JavaScript rewrites parts of the page to show you that new record. So things are going faster and faster. And so what's great about that is that it's actually rendering. Now, the only downside of this was that we hadn't really reached the right place where what's going on is that it's still rewriting and pulling down a fair amount of data to do this web browser, meaning that it's better than the full page, but you're still sending down a lot of things. Now, there's a new methodology that's being adopted where you're going to use something similar, but this is how it's going to work, is that the web browser, and this is actually in place now, sends a AJAX callback to the app server to say, like, give me that new record. And then what happens is instead of sending a whole page or even big chunks of the page, the app server sends back a set of JSON that represents that new record. And then the web browser then just updates the fields with the JSON data to reflect the new information. So what's happening is through each of these things are getting faster and faster because you're sending less and less data. In this, you had to send a whole page. Now you have to send a fair amount of information because it has to write the JavaScript to rewrite portions of it. But now it's only going to be sending back JSON. And so one of the key tools to do this is called the HTML template command. And we'll cover that in a future one. Because I think it's beyond the scope of today. But this is another reason, and I hope this is understandable. I know it kind of went off into the weeds a little bit, but what I wanted to get across was that the world of the future is this, is that you build systems that move JSON around, either between web systems like an app server calling a third party. So for instance, maybe you have something like this. And so let's say you want to show the user some Twitter data. What will happen is that, and let me go ahead and do this here. Grab a shape here. If I can grab it, doesn't want to grab it. Oh, I see, it's putting them down here, excuse me. So what happens is, let's say I want to show the user some more Twitter data. I'll send the call back. The app server will call Twitter through a API, grab JSON, and then take that JSON and send it right back to the web browser. Then it will get rendered to show the user the thing. And the beauty of this is that these are very small chunks of data, so that therefore they run very quickly and very effectively. And so JSON is going back from the app server, but also JSON is being passed back and forth between here. And so JSON is a critical, I call it a plumbing piece in the internet and in modern applications. And it's something, the more you understand, the more. And the cool thing is at Alpha, we'll continually make it easier and easier for you to generate and consume JSON, but also the next generation of the user interface development tools will rely heavily on taking this JSON and allowing you to represent it inside the web browser. So that's kind of, I kind of wanted to take a step back and kind of go to a high level and explain a little bit more about and actually, let me do one other thing here. This was a HTTP request. To give you a feel for why JSON is so important and why it's becoming more and more important, the Alpha has internal capabilities, functionality. Alpha has the list control, which heavily is dependent upon JSON, not only to show you to represent JSON in a visual manner, but also it manages data as JSON. And also going forward more and more, you're going to be seeing new techniques that will allow you to create very powerful front ends that are merely requesting and displaying JSON data to the user. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and open up it for questions. And I hope that's given you a kind of a good feeling for what JSON is, how Alpha approaches it, and what we're going to be able to do with it in the future.
That's great. All right, looking through at questions, we have a question from Edward who asks, can Alpha be a web service provider?
The answer is yes. Alpha has the ability to answer calls, much like this Twitter. So you can turn this around where actually other systems can call the app server. And what you'll do is on the app server, you'll generate JSON and send that JSON back. And the only tricky parts with this that you'll find out is that obviously security is a critical component. So some of the complexity comes in terms of how do you secure this relationship. So for instance, Twitter, you just can't call it, they have some sample APIs, but usually you have to have an account on Twitter and then you get a secret key that you have to pass. And we'll have the same functionality. And what's cool is the development team is in the process of making it easier and easier to not only consume JSON from web services, but turn Alpha into a web server. So you can do it now, and basically you're writing functions that generate JSON and then pass it back to the requester, and it's and very simple to do. And it will become even simpler with the next round of technology development coming from the development group.
That's great. I don't actually see a lot of other questions from today.
If I could have a secondary comment on that, that'd be really about Edward. I appreciate you asking that question. Up to now, a lot of people are building sort of, their own system there. And what they'll do is they may need initially to call out to other systems to grab data and information to support their application. But the way and the focus on a lot of systems out there is trying to figure out ways to build an ecosystem around your system. So over time, what you want to be able to do is be able to have your API, a secure API, so that third parties for your system can write their own sort of essentially extensions and capabilities to your system. So maybe you have a financial application system that someone's doing there. Well, you may want to be able to have your clients hire a programmer to do some things that you're not planning on doing by having a nice web API around it using standard JSON and standard authentication schemes. You can easily open up your app so you don't have to create everything yourself. People can be developing connections and enhancing the value of your application using this technology.
Excellent. Well, we have a question in from Jeff who asks, is there any way to secure JSON data other than an HTTPS connection?
That is a good question. You can encode JSON and put them as files on, say, a mobile solution, so if you wanted static. But that's the only way I know offhand, but I can take a note to see if any of the other developers know any other tricks for grabbing it. But right now, I think it uses standard kind of internet calls to call back and grab that data, and then the data comes back as a JSON string coming to the system.
Mm-hmm. Great. Oh, someone's asking about upcoming videos, whether or not we'll be doing a Bootstrap integration video. Do you want to speak to that there, Dan?
Yeah, we've gotten requests on that, and we're working on putting that together. I just have to say, personally, I have not integrated with Bootstrap myself, so I have to find the right person to bring into the fold here to explain it. So we'll be looking at that in the near future.
Excellent. And that might be it for questions. Let me take one last look here. You can always ask your question later as well by sending an email to guides, Guides, at alphasoftware.com. Tomorrow we are going to have another webinar, not part of our regular webinar series, but it will show the integration of Alpha Anywhere and Aperion, which is a multi-device management software which is used especially when building mobile applications for big enterprises. It'll be here tomorrow at 1 o'clock. You should have received an email for that to register. If you haven't received an email to that, you can send an email to guides@alphasoftware.com, and I'd be happy to send you along the information you need. So I believe that covers it for today's webinar. I want to thank everyone who attended, and thank you, Dion. We hope to see
Thank
you
you.
at another webinar very soon. Take care.
If I survive.
Yeah, is it snowing up there yet, by the way? Is that
No, not
right,
snowing.
all
It's
right,
just
good.
getting a little chilly.
Just
Actually,
getting chilly. Yeah.
I just thank God I'm not doing this webinar from Minneapolis.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be brutal. Brutal.
Then I'd be in really, it'd be like frozen Texas guy, they'd just see me sitting outside or something.
That wouldn't be good. Well,
No.
thank you again, everyone. Take care, and bye-bye.